And welcome everybody. My name is Patrick Field. I'm a facilitator with the Consensus Building Institute, or CBI for short, and working with the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council to assist in their really terrific work. So I want to first turn this over to one of the co-chairs and the key co-chair for farmers of the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee. So Abby Corse, I'm going to turn this over to you to give us a welcome. So Abby, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I want to extend my sincerest appreciations to you all for assembling this evening. I know that this is a really, really difficult time of year for all of you to come to this table, and I cannot express my appreciation enough for the fact that the farmers that have turned up and those of you representing farmers or trying to get this word out to farmers are here this evening. Just a little bit of context for everything. I think that we are trying to approach so much of this work, seeing that agriculture, particularly in the state of Vermont, presents a solution and an opportunity in the face of a changing climate. And so a lot of what we're really trying to work on is how can we bolster, support, enhance farmers, farm workers, producers' abilities to thrive and to provide the multitude of benefits that you all do every day to the citizens of Vermont as we move forward, as climate change takes hold in ways that I think more people are becoming aware. But for most of you assembled here, when you're out in the elements every day, you're already very much aware of how things are already shifting around us. Agriculture is obviously, as I see it, and I think as everyone here sees it, fundamental to the past, present, and future of Vermont, and we see it that way as well. And just a little bit about me, I applied to be the farm and forest sector representative to the Agriculture and to the Vermont Climate Council, because I think that policy is too often made in isolation of the people who have to carry it out. And those of you assembled here are some of the people who are most tied in to some of those really critical implementation steps that have to happen to ensure not only that food is provided sustainably and in environmentally sound ways to our communities, but also that the benefits, the full range of benefits of natural and working lands are realized for the citizens of our state. In attacking this work within the Agriculture and Ecosystems Subcommittee, we really tried to bring to the table folks that, you know, I felt and others felt could think really in a multifaceted and very broad way about how the entire industry and sector was going to need to tackle some of these challenges. And so our process has borne out in that way, right? We haven't shied away from tensions. We've tried to think through lots of interesting ways and priorities, and you know, are looking forward to tonight to sort of test out where we've gotten to and what your thoughts and feelings are in that regard. This is obviously a public meeting, but really want to just put a point on the fact that the intention is to really hear feedback from, again, the farmers, the farm workers and producers that are tied in, or people representing them, that are tied into how this work needs to be carried out, to try to get a sense of how we can improve the recommendations that we're making moving forward, and how we can best represent your needs, your interests, and your desires to be successful as we move forward. So again, thank you also, I farm at the Corse Farm Dairy in Whitingham, Vermont, with my folks, Leanna and Linda. Some of you may know them. I'm the 6th generation to farm here. Welcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Abby, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. This wouldn't really be possible without many of the folks in Vermont with their networks to reach out and invite you all to this meeting. So we did ask for some folks to co-sponsor the meeting so we could really get a wide range of participants across the state here. So I want to turn to really our co-sponsors, and want to thank you for doing so and helping prepare the materials, give us feedback on the materials. All faults are my own, as well as actually reach out to your networks to get people here, which we really appreciate. So I first want to turn to John Roberts to welcome us as a co-sponsor. Then I'll turn to Lindsey briefly and to Heather. So John, over to you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our listening event for the Agriculture Stakeholders meeting for the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. This is one of several meetings scheduled to hear Vermonters' reactions to some of the proposed solutions to our climate situation. Tonight, we are focused on agriculture. Among all of those who I wish to thank, including all the farmers who are here tonight, but especially the Grand Island Franklin Watershed Alliance farmers, the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance Group, and the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition for participating tonight. My name is John Roberts. I'm a former dairy farmer and presently executive director of the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition. We're a farmer advocacy group based in Middlebury, Vermont. We have 100 farmer members, from some of the largest in Vermont down to a beekeeper, both conventional and organic. We subscribe to the belief that we all have an important role to play in improving our environment, our water quality, and our economic sustainability. Farmers are well known for doing what needs to be done. And with the help of a pair of vice grips, a hammer, some baler twine, and maybe some duct tape, we can fix anything. Now is one of those times to demonstrate that resiliency and have your say. Tell us what we got wrong, what we missed out, and what you feel is most important to you. Thank you, and all the members of the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you, John. And first, I want to thank Lindsey Brown, who's also willing to co-sponsor, but also help facilitate, so appreciate it. And Lindsey, if you want to say a few words on behalf of NOFA, over to you.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having us, and I'm so excited that we have so many people on this call tonight. I work for the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. We promote organic practices and more broadly are working to build an economically viable, ecologically sound, and socially just Vermont agriculture system. One of our core driving beliefs is that agriculture not only can be, but must be a solution to climate change. And that's driven by the science that supports that belief, but also by all of the farms and farmers in our community who have the strength to use their skill set to try to fight climate change as well. Thank you.
Lindsey, thank you. And Heather Darby, I think from UVM, I think Extension, I think you're there. So I'd love to hear a few words from you.
I am here, and I was at my son's soccer game, so sitting in the truck right now. Anyway, I'm Heather Darby with the University of Vermont Extension, and I also, like others, I'm just so excited to see such a great turnout tonight of the farming community. Having a say is critically important in this matter. And I have been an advocate to, get farmers to speak up and to be able to have a say. And as a member of Extension, as also a member of the Farmers Watershed Alliance, that's what we do, is we advocate for the farmers that we work with and make sure that you're at the table. So thanks for coming to the table.
Great, thank you. And again, thank you, the subcommittee, thank you, the co-sponsors, so appreciate it. So what we're going to do for the agenda is this. We're going to do a kind of a brief overview of the Vermont Climate Council just to set the context, and Jane is going to share that with us and really appreciate that. Then we're really going to have just a little bit of setting the stage about where agriculture in Vermont has been and is going per some of the really good work that Ag has already done around water quality. And Ryan Patch is going to share some thoughts there from AAFM. And then Alyssa and David from the subcommittee are really going to dive in and share in draft kind of the emerging ideas, strategies, thoughts for what the subcommittee is thinking for how Ag, not as the problem, but as a significant part of the solution, can maybe go forward in terms of addressing climate in a number of ways, in terms of emissions reductions, but maybe more importantly, in terms of sequestration, storage, resilience, and adaptation. And so really excited to hear from them. We'll take a few questions from folks. Again, want to kind of focus on kind of farmers first in this meeting. So kind of people can make space for farmers to speak first. That would be much appreciated. And then we're going to breakouts. And we really want people in smaller groups to be able to dive into some core questions, which I'll share in a moment. We'll do that for a period of time where we can really be rich. We'll take some really good notes. And then what we'll do is we'll come back for a very short ending, quick summary, report outs, kind of where to from here in terms of next steps and close. And we'll try to be timely as well. We are recording the plenary session. We won't record the breakouts, but we do ask facilitators to save chat. And we're assimilating all this good information, and we will do a meeting summary, which will be publicly posted as soon as we can. We also are going to put towards the end of the meeting in the chat, we'll also send it out to all registrants, essentially a simple survey monkey, which essentially asks the same questions as we're asking tonight. But in case you want to add more color or more detail in writing, in case you feel you didn't get a word in edgewise, you absolutely can fill that survey out as well. Or you can repeat the same thing you said verbally. We're happy for all that input. So look forward to getting that input that way as well. Okay, enough said from me. So what I'm going to do is hand this over to Jane to kind of really set the context for the Vermont Climate Council overall. And Maggie's going to share slides.
Evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to just connect with you all for a few minutes about how the work of the Agri and Ecosystems Subcommittee fits into the larger work of the Vermont Climate Council. I'm Jane Zorchek. I am the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act. I work in service to the Vermont Climate Council to support and uphold the effort of the Climate Council's work, as well I sit within the Agency of Natural Resources. So next slide, please. This is a lot of words on here, but I want to just orient you to the full breadth of the work that the Climate Council is embarking on right now. The Global Warming Solutions Act was passed last fall in September, enacted later that fall as the Climate Council met for its first time in November. The Climate Council itself is staffed by 23 council members, of which 8 are the executive branch representing various agencies and commission departments that have a stake in climate change ideas and recommendations, and then 15 appointments from the legislature representing various interests across the state, from agriculture to manufacturing to forestry and beyond. All of those folks are working in service to adopting a climate action plan at the end of this year. That climate action plan is the first of what will be an iterative process. There is no way, we don't expect that every solution to help us meet the requirements of the law will be put forward in this first plan. And we also recognize that our work with the Vermont public to bring you all along, to work inside an effort with you to uphold your ideas, this co-creation process that we're embarking on will be just a first step across the next few weeks and months. The climate action plan requirements are broad in nature and speak to the different buckets of work to advance sustainable climate policy. First and foremost, based on the way the law is set up, there are requirements to meet greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors that contribute to them. First and foremost in Vermont, that's transportation, making up almost half of our emissions. But that is not where climate policy starts and finishes. There are other components speaking to smart growth related strategies, long-term sequestration and storage carbon, and then net zero across all sectors by 2050 is written into the law, reducing energy burdens for rural and marginalized communities, and then limit the use of chemicals and substances that contribute to climate change, as well, and most importantly, perhaps for all of you in your conversations tonight, there is a requirement to build and encourage climate adaptation and resilience of Vermont's communities and natural systems, of which agriculture surely supports a large component of that. Next slide, Maggie. There's been a clear sequence of work over the course of the last year guided by the Global Warming Solutions Act, the law. There were 5 subcommittees, of which Ag and Ecosystems is one of, that are really where the meat of the work has been happening. They're comprised of the technical experts, the diversity needed to write good and recommendations and engage with all of you around the right ideas to put forward and up to the council. There's also a committee that has some overlap and coordination with Ag and Ecosystems, looking specifically at rural resilience and adaptation, really focused more on the built environment than Ag and Ecosystems is, working in the space of natural and working lands. Cross-sector is the subcommittee that's focused most on how to cut pollution, how to hit those emission targets. And then just transitions and science data are 2 of the subcommittees that are really upholding the work of the 3 others, building equity, thinking about how we unfold the work of the climate plan, as well as science and data, what is the best information that we need to put this plan forward and make recommendations. To date, the subcommittee's focus were first on inventorying existing programs, not to try to reinvent the wheel, but actually stand up and invest in programs that are already helping us to meet these requirements of the law. And then have taken an approach to identify and think about new strategies that'll be needed to help us meet this ambitious requirements. And then where we're going to now is the how. How are we going to get this done? And that includes financing ideas, strategies, and how to further support implementation. Put some of those things that we want to hear from you, as well as I'll speak to some further engagement opportunities at the end of the night that you can also participate in. We'll also be developing a monitoring strategy for all of this and moving into rulemaking that will help us succeed with the climate action plan that'll be adopted in December. Next slide, please. I just wanted to focus for a moment on the equity component of the climate action plan. The Just Transition Subcommittee really embarked on an ambitious endeavor over the course of the last few months in order to put forward a definition for what a just transition would look like in Vermont as we think about how we decarbonize and move off of fossil fuels. That's the main tenet of the Global Warming Solutions Act, built in as well with the resilience, sequestration, and adaptation requirements too. Next slide. That component of equity is guided by the development of 6 guiding principles. Those principles are intended to help us determine how we put forward our recommendations, ideas in every one of these buckets of work and in the space that we'll be discussing tonight. It's an attempt to do better and be transparent in the decisions that we in state government are making. And that process starts here with you and continues through the implementation of the Climate Action Plan. Next slide. Equity is front and center and has been the focus of our work, but we also recognize that the Global Warming Solutions Act speaks to other components of how we'll lift up and elevate the strategies needed to implement climate policy in Vermont. We'll speak to ideas that bring forward co-benefits that aren't working in just one bucket of work, but trying to mitigate and think about how we further advance all of those buckets of work with the recommendations, cutting pollution, building investment in resilience in our natural and working lands, and further. We want to put forward cost-effective ideas that have a high impact with the goals that we're trying to achieve, but also are relative to mindful to the cost for Vermonters. We want to make progress towards the GWSA requirements and goals, the biggest impact ideas, and we want to put forward ideas that are feasible. And again, all of this will come together in December 1st to put forward a bucket of work that speaks to resilience and adaptation, mitigation, and sequestration. The ideas being that all of that is complementary to climate policy. Those are the broad buckets. I look forward to hearing what Ryan puts forward and recognize the work that has been done in the agricultural sector to date, and look forward to furthering the conversation tonight with all of you. Thanks.
Great. Jane, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And again, we're going to go through a few pieces and then certainly have time for questions before we go to breakout. So I want to turn next to Ryan Patch from the Agency for Agricultural Food and Markets and really talk a little bit about the linkages between the good work the farming community and farms and many have done to try to advance water quality in Vermont and how that is related to the future and what all the agriculture can do for climate. So Ryan, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thanks, Pat. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
Great, thank you. So my computer's decided to die, so I have no notes or presentation, but it's only 5 minutes, so folks will have to listen to me free form, try to recount a bit of the recent water quality history and the important nexus to climate work and opportunities for agriculture. So just to reiterate what everyone said, really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here this evening so we can share and get input on this process. So for context, right, when agriculture was faced with the disapproval of the TMDL back in 2011, and the state began to work on working on a phosphorus remediation plan for Lake Champlain. Folks will remember that big pie chart, which had many different colors, for which agriculture had that largest single slice, 41% of the contribution of phosphorus to Lake Champlain. And from that starting place, a lot of important conversations took place with stakeholders, farmers of all different sectors, types and sizes to begin to build a plan for how the state and agriculture could respond to the water quality challenges that face not just Lake Champlain, but also Memphremagog and the Connecticut River for established CMDLs. So that this work, as we all know, culminated in Act 64 of 2015, and it really came to fruition, because of the engagement of farmers and the willingness to step up and commit to working to adopt practices that will reduce phosphorus runoff from farms. And what we've seen since that time is very heartening for not only the water quality story in Vermont, but I think the opportunities that it also shows for work related to the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Vermont Climate Council. Some of the results that we have from this water quality work, includes, today, last fiscal year, 2020, over 30% of Vermont's annual crop fields were cover cropped through state and federal programs. Since 2015, over 300,000 acres of cumulative practices have been adopted across farms and state and federal cost share programs. And what this has culminated in reporting in Vermont's Clean Water Investment Report of between 99 and 96% of the total phosphorus reductions has come from the agricultural sector at this point. And so as we'll learn from Alyssa and David in the next presentation about some of the specific practices that have that nexus to water quality, what I want to share is a lot of the water quality efforts that farmers are already engaged in: cover cropping, no-till, grazing management. All of those practices can have a co-benefit that can be quantified for Vermont's climate goals. That protocol and methodology needs to be built, but it's being tracked through the state and federal partnership and interstate tracking for water quality. So state of Vermont, right, we have 94% of Vermont natural and working lands, 12% of that is in agriculture. Many farms manage a lot of woodland in addition to their cropland. And so farms are well placed on the landscape to provide, many of the, if not all of the different types of improvements that are useful in the climate discussion: mitigation opportunities, sequestration opportunities, as well as providing adaptation and resilience. And a big lens of that has been soil health. And luckily, many of the soil health practices that work for water quality also have often many climate co-benefits. So I'll pause here just to say I am optimistic. Farmers are shared with a task or a goal in the water quality front. Really the engagement has been just fantastic, and much of that work can be leveraged, continued in this climate space. So thanks for the opportunity to share that framing, and look forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Ryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And now for the subcommittee's kind of emerging recommendations, I'm going to turn to Alyssa White and David Mears, who are going to share with you all some of the thinking and work of the subcommittee for us then to dive into and digest and talk about in our breakout. So Alyssa and David, over to you.
Well, great. Well, I'll start just by introducing myself. I'm David Mears. I'm the Executive Director of Audubon Vermont. And I'll kick off with talking about some of our themes. But Alyssa, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll hand it to you when we get to the recommendations.
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. My name is Alyssa White. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Vermont. I work with Heather Darby at UVM Extension and the Gunn Institute for Environment, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks, Alyssa. I saw the slides for a minute pop up. Can whoever's running that slide? Oh, thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Maggie. So thanks to others for knowing how to use PowerPoint and making all these wonderful slides. But the next slide is just it's a list of the folks on our task group. And I put these names up here. I won't walk through all of them, but just to remind everyone, this is Vermont. There isn't some like group of elite, experts off in the distance that are inaccessible that wrote this up. The people here, you probably know most of us on this list, and you know how little we actually know. So that's partly why we're having this meeting, is to get your feedback and make sure we're not headed off in some random direction that's the wrong way. I also just want to note that this group, I really enjoyed working with this group. Just a fantastic, particular shout out to the Agency of Ag staff who put in countless hours to help us kind of understand a lot of the background information on the climate pieces. But everyone here has put in a ton of work, and I guarantee it's more work than we expected to have put in. I told my boss, "Oh, we'll be done with this by June. That's when our recommendations are due to the council." And it looks like we've still got a ways to go. So next slide. I'm just going to run through a few key themes. For those of you who remember the time when I was the DEC commissioner, you recall that I often would lead in conversations when we're talking about agriculture that farms are not the problem. Farms are frankly the solution. Farms, a well-managed farm is bar and above the most important investment we can make in terms of water quality in Vermont. And frankly, thank you, by the way, while I got the microphone, thank you for all the work that the ag community has done in that direction. But one of the key strategies for Vermont that our subcommittee and the task group have recognized is we need to keep farms as farms. Farms that become subdivisions are not a way to optimize carbon storage and sequestration. That doesn't work that way. But a well-managed farm can. It can store additional carbon in the soil and the woody material. You'll see this in our recommendations. But anyway, that's a key theme. Another key theme, the next one down, is that we're talking not just about mitigation, which is which is a shorthand for reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. That's an important place. Farms definitely are a source of greenhouse gases, and we can reduce that. But as important, maybe more important, are the ways in which farms are part of our future as we experience the extreme weather of flooding and droughts, the disruptions to food supplies, all the things that climate is going to do to us. Farms are a key piece of our ability to respond to that. And we wanted recommendations that recognize that. Then the next one down is that there are truly opportunities to innovate in the way that farms operate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, that there's a lot of this work already happening. For instance, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that's really equal to being efficient. And I know there's no farmer that wants to spend money on red dyed diesel that they don't have to. So there's already a lot of work that's been done in this arena. There's a lot of work as Ryan described relating to clean water. And we want to recognize and build on those things that are working already. Next slide. And then one note of caution is that we are assuming that the Global Warming Solutions Act framework and targets, as they are sorted out as between the administration and the legislature and advocates, will actually be able to account for all of the positives that agriculture brings to the table in terms of the potential for storing carbon and sequestering carbon. And so there's some work to do there yet. There's some confusion, I would say, about how that's going to all sort out. At least I'm confused about it. Alyssa actually can maybe describe in more detail, a more technical language, but I just wanted, that's kind of a footnote that this is something that all of us need to pay attention to. We're not just thinking of agriculture as a source of greenhouse gases, but really, more importantly, there's an opportunity for recommendations that take a bigger view, larger view of all the benefits. So with that, I'll hand it to Alyssa to talk in more detail about the categories of recommendations.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And thanks everybody for all the work to put this together, and for folks that that took part of their evening to show up. So I get to go through like all gritty details of what our recommendations are and the ways that Vermont can meet the goals set out in the Global Warming Solutions Act. And I just I've got a bunch of slides here with lists really of all the recommendations. Our subcommittee has come up with, I think, 188 different actions that we could recommend to help meet those goals. And I'm not going to read all of them tonight, but I will get through kind of like the big themes and what I think are kind of the most important ones to share with this community to give you a sense of where we're headed. And I also just want to acknowledge that, you know, climate change in agriculture and its impacts is not a new thing. Farmers have been on the front lines of dealing with the impacts of climate change already, have been actively working to adapt to it. And I know that many of you have a really strong commitment to being part of the climate change solution in the way that you already steward the natural resources on your land. And from my perspective, this is really a community that cares a lot about climate change. So while these issues are not really new, climate change kind of worsens or exacerbates existing issues. So some of what's in our recommendations are not new ideas, but much of what we see is needing to be done is to help those people and programs that are already working on some of these things to be better resourced, to be fully funded, or to have a climate lens added to their work. So there's a lot of work to do to achieve the goals that have been set out. Let's get to it. I think one of the first primary goals that our subcommittee is focused towards is working to sustain and increase carbon sequestration on farm and forest land. And we realize there are a number of practices that you can adopt on your farm that may increase soil carbon content. These are things you're familiar with, from no-till and reduced tillage to adding cover crops. There are ways that rotational grazing can increase soil carbon stocks. Agroforestry is a practice that maybe has been less supported in the past, but clearly has lots of climate change benefits. Additionally, edge of field buffers are things that increase soil carbon sequestration. And so we're looking to really support and empower farmers and foresters to sustain carbon stocks and increase them. And we can do that by leveraging and extending new already existing programs, but also to develop and implement new programs around healthy soils and carbon sequestration. And so we have an interest in seeing if there's a way the Payment for Ecosystem Services program development can help serve this goal as well. Let's move to the next slide. Great. Okay, so another thing that we need to do is try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and support farmers in being able to do that. And that means really looking at existing programs that already could kind of support farmers in reducing greenhouse gas emissions through adopting changes in management on the farm. And so that means solid manure management where appropriate. So if manure is known to produce greater emissions of methane and nitrous oxide, and so where we can move to more solid manure management, that will reduce emissions. So that means potentially looking at how we can incorporate more covers or roofs or methane capture and energy generation. Enteric emissions are a big part of kind of the contribution of agriculture to emissions from the sector. And so looking at how feed management and rations could be changed or to affect climate change outcomes is one piece that we could look at. There are some grazing and agronomic practices that can reduce nitrous oxide emissions from the soil surface, as well as being really efficient about fertilizer application and incorporation techniques, which probably really well fits into the work that you're already doing in nutrient management plans. And there's also possibility to look at how we can provide better support and capacity for responsible energy transformation in terms of the sources of energy that you use on your farm. Let's move to the next slide. I'm going to go through these quick. I know there's lots of explaining to do, but I really want to take the time to get through the list. You can ask questions later. There's lots of resources with these lists elsewhere, and really get to the part where we get to hear from you later. Okay, so another one of the goals is to enhance the resilience and adaptation of Vermont's farms and forests. And so we're looking at really better resourcing, climate adaptation, planning, training, and technical assistance for all farmers and foresters. So that means, working with extension, with the conservation districts. There are lots of different folks that already work in those kinds of relationships with you, and giving them more resources and capacity to support farmers in planning around climate adaptation is one thing that could be really important. We also know that farmer to farmer peer learning is one way that farmers have already learned about climate adaptation tools and strategies. And so any way that we can support more of that, I think will be really beneficial. And one of the key pieces of this is thinking about soil health and the soil sponge and the way that the soil can function to both absorb and capture and keep water there during times of drought, but also to prevent erosion and damage from heavy storm events. We're also we understand that like thinking about the whole farm water system is important in terms of dealing with climate change impacts. And so having some really dedicated programs and funding to support investment in, earth moving and earthworks for ponds or other things that are mitigative of erosive force of water, as well as like putting in irrigation infrastructure or
Begin here.
new
Thank
water
you.
pumps.
You're good.
And of course, like any resources that can support farm viability will enable farmers to better bounce back from financial impacts of climate shocks. Okay, let's move to the next slide. All right, and then we realized that a lot of the pieces behind what enables farmers to adapt to climate change and bounce back from impacts of really kind of big climate events are financial issues. And so we know that in the past, resilience funds that have popped up have been really important to support farmers in bouncing back from big climate impacts and also enabling them to invest proactively in some of the climate adaptation practices. And so building those resilience funds and making sure that there are enough for all farmers is really important. We know that the use of crop insurance is pretty low for many Vermont farmers. And so there's some modifications to those kinds of programs that could be made to better serve farmers in supporting them when they have big crop loss due to climate impacts. There's also been talk about developing new lending programs that are really focused on helping farms adopt climate smart practices and proactively think about climate change. And there's also just a clear need to add a climate lens to all of the existing funding and support programs and make sure that climate change adaptation and resilience is included in those kinds of planning and programs that already exist. And of course, we've talked a lot in our group about how do we ensure that there's equitable access for all farmers to that kind of financial assistance, to the technical assistance that is out there, to research and resources for all farmers. Next slide, please, Maggie. Great, okay. And our group has also gotten to think about things at kind of a bigger systems level and how we can implement the solutions to climate change in a way that equitably supports, grows, and connects both local food systems, but also the rural economy and strengthens farmers' livelihoods. So we've looked at developing and sustaining local markets that are specifically for food, ag, and forest products, and really ensuring that there are strong markets there for your products, as well as linking low-income food consumers to local food access and kind of enhancing the programs that already exist as a way to alleviate food insecurity that we know may be exacerbated by some of the more removed impacts of climate change and vulnerability in those populations. And then, just as a cross-cutting theme, I think one of the things we would really appreciate a lot of feedback in is how we can implement some of these ideas that I've listed and some that aren't on here in a way that is more equitable and offers equitable access to people that have kind of historically been left out. And of course, fully funding Vermont's Farm to Plate plan is like a really easy go. There is a lot of thinking that's already been done about how to enhance local food systems and the rural economy and food security. And there's a plan that's been laid out. And so one of our recommendations is really just to follow through on fully funding existing programs and plans that have put out there. Next slide, please. Okay, and lastly, I'll just say that this of course is not exhaustive, but some of our conversations have been around how we can kind of shape land use for a long-term sustainable and equitable vision of the future. And so that means expanding funding and incentives to protect farmland from development, It means really understanding better and elevating the role that traditional ecological knowledge can play in climate adaptation and resilience, and understand how we can incorporate that into the state-led climate assessments, into planning efforts and prioritization frameworks. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. We've also talked about enhancing education outreach and technical assistance programs that support farmer learning and that support the adoption of climate smart agricultural practices and ensure equitable access, and as kind of like a long-term vision for sustainable land use. Coordinating with the existing resources of the NRCS cost share programs to elevate climate mitigation and adaptation practices makes a lot of sense. And so there's just a lot of work to do around coordination, collaboration across existing agencies. And one of the last things that I'll mention here is just a recommendation to create a body across Vermont government that would be kind of an interagency Office of Climate Change to coordinate across sectors. All right, next slide. Or is that the end?
You give one more.
Here you are. So
great. I get to hand it off to David.
Well, thank you, Alyssa. That was a marathon sprint, but fantastic job of really giving some color to all those. I want to quickly respond to the message or the question in the chat from Gary about did we consider cost? And the answer is yes and no. That is yes, in the sense of all of the people that were participating in these conversations were cognizant of thinking about like which of these are big lifts and which of these things could we do relatively efficiently, but not in any systematic way. Nor frankly have we systematically gone through and calculated all of the climate and carbon benefits of each one of these recommendations, or the adaptation and mitigation benefits. That's work that remains to be done in a more systematic way. And it's part of the reason we're in a place where we're also still getting public input. We've got, of the 180 some odd recommendations that we have, we're interested in looking for which ones are really the top priorities. So when we give the package to the legislature, it's not this impossible thing to swallow, but that there are some strategic things that the agencies and the administration can do. And in terms of the fear that this will be a short-term one and done, there's no way that we address the significant climate issues that we face in the state, or frankly the future of agriculture, without making some long-term investments. So appreciate that perspective. Turning turning around in terms of questions for you. These are just three. I mean, there's 1,000 questions we should be asking you and questions that you'll have for us. But here's some questions just as we go into breakouts and start thinking and debating things. One question that we've been debating within the group has been, how do we balance the regulatory tools that we have versus technical assistance and financial assistance? How much do we rely on markets to drive the change that we need to see, and how much do we rely on command and control? So those are issues that we're trying to figure out. And I would say, I think there's a general agreement that we need some mix of all of those things, but it's finding the right balance is a question. Another category is, how do we do the, and this is the question Alyssa framed up, how do we provide these tools in a way that are equitable and inclusive? Equitable in the sense of, there's a set of issues around people that have been traditionally excluded, people of color, people that don't own land. How do we get a variety of people engaged in farming and agriculture, and how do we have policies that encourage that? But also, it's the differences between the really large and the smaller farmers, or between different categories of farmers. So how do we make sure that we don't have policies that unintentionally or passively steer agricultural policies in ways that are not fair and not inclusive? And then finally, a really substantial issue for the state of Vermont that's beyond agriculture, but what do we want our state to look like? Are we going to, our landscape has been transforming over many decades. And, there's one particular challenge, which is the increase in development and housing, as it sprawls out across the landscape. Once we lose farmland and forest land to development, it's hard to get it back, if not impossible. But that's a constant, continuous pressure. How do we manage that? And how do we manage the amount of land that we want to be in productive working forest, working farm status? And how do we make those decisions? Are those local decisions? Is that regional, statewide? So those are the categories of issues that we're continuing to discuss and debate and welcome your perspectives on.
Great. David and Alyssa,
That's right.
thank you. Really, really appreciate it. Abby, I think you wanted to add one more question, which I wanted you to do. And I want to see if there's a few initial questions we'll start with, and then we'll go to breakouts. But Abby, over to you.
Yes, apologies for taking up more space, but I did just want to add that something we have been thinking over, but I think, and I personally am wrestling with this a lot as I think about the average age of the farmer increasing. And, you know, we talk a lot about farm viability, but the reality is that the farms don't function without the farmers. And so as we're developing out this work, how can we include or what is it that you need as farmers to remain viable as well is a question that I think we do want to be contemplating. I know that for every single person that looks really differently. And I also know that as farmers, right, we're not taught to think about ourselves in the equation. We're just taught to get up and do what we need to do and dive into the toolbox that John described and figure things out. But I also think at some point it's really important to think about what the next generations of farmers are going to need, what are the issues that they're facing, and so how too can we frame this work as we move forward to ensure that we're building out a pipeline of future farmers that can uphold and maintain these traditions that we all hold so dear and accomplish all of this work moving into the future so that our citizens can remain fed and have access to, our natural and working lands in the state that we all want them to remain. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Abby. And a really nice point in the chat about kind of ground cover and reducing radiation. So that's really nice. So we're going to go into breakouts to dive really deep, but we want to give people just a general chance to ask clarifying questions or the like before we do that. So if people want to ask a question or two of our subcommittee here, you can raise your hand in the raise hand function. It's usually sitting under reactions. If you just want to put in chat, hey, Pat, I want to say something, that's fine. And we'll call in a few folks. So Molly, you're up. And I think Gary, I see you next. So Molly, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. My question is, have you folks on the committee, the subcommittee, tried to figure out because these various practices, and I know you have 188 on your spreadsheet, have you tried to figure out what would actually be the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from each of these possible recommendations that you have on the list? Because it seems to me that we need to be getting at what's the potential for each of these practices to reduce our emissions, and then what's the cost, and find some place to have those meet. But these things obviously need to be prioritized.
David and Alyssa, I don't know if you want to respond to kind of some of the measurement questions there.
Yeah, and I probably fumbled this when I said it earlier, but I'll just try to say what I said earlier in a different way that's more clear. But we haven't really done that work, and I completely agree that we need to do it. And I think that the way, Molly, you described it is exactly right. Kind of where do those lines cross, where we're getting the most bang for our buck in terms of the reduction of carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, the maximizing resilience and adaptation benefits for the least cost. That's absolutely where we need to get to. And we have not yet done that. That's work that remains in front of us.
And Ryan Patch, did you have a thought maybe to this question of metrics as well? I don't know, or measurement.
Sure. There exists a number of different protocols out there that can assign emission reduction coefficient to a conservation practice implemented on a farm, whether that's tied to mitigation as far as emission reduction or increase in sequestration within the soils, or both. There exists a number of different tools and models, as well as studies and measurements that can help assign values. A course analysis of that has been done for many of the existing practices that have been funded through existing financial assistance programs in the state, but the specific protocol quantification has not been finalized or adopted. And as Jane put into the chat, that's work that's ongoing in the mitigation space. And also to David's point, we don't have a robust analysis of all of the recommendations that are part of the subcommittee's recommendation. A lot of it is focused a lot of the analysis to date has been focused in the practice implementation space, conservation practices on farms specifically.
Thank you. Let me go to the three hands that are up. I've got Gary Deere, I've got James, and I've got Dede, and then we might begin to move into the breakouts. But Gary Deere, you're up next. And Gary, you'll need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
You got it. Yep.
Yes, I asked a question about, have you thought about funding? Where I'm coming from is Vermont has a long history of having some really good policies in this area and energy, but they underfund it and the funds run out quickly. Now I know for next year, Vermont from the federal government's getting a boatload of money, but my guess is that lasts us 1 year. So I really suggest all of us think about ensuring when the final document is written that there's a plan for year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to like a 10-year plan. And I would ask of you, if you had all the money you need, where would you start in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5?
Gary, thank you. Very helpful. And one of the things I think that the subcommittee is going to begin to do is think about nearer term and longer term actions, which is they will begin to do as they sort through this really valuable list, a big list of strategies. James, I think you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm James Key. I'm on the board of directors of the Vermont Beekeepers Association, as well as a Vermont certified beekeeper. I've been listening and just trying to gain a sense and also to get a little bit knowledge about my other farming community. I have yet to hear about beekeepers and the importance of beekeepers as part of the farming community as well. A lot is focused on the dairy community, which is definitely given because we are a dairy state. But my point is that there should be focus on maybe encouraging some of the farmers to do rotational crops using some of the indigenous species instead of clover and or such to what they may feed their animals, and maybe some of that money could subsidize such a project where 1 or 2 or maybe at most 5 acres are dedicated to some of the indigenous species like milkweed, goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, many of the things that we're losing very quickly and rapidly to Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is a plant that may seem beneficial for honeybees, but overall, really what the honeybees need are what's indigenous to the landscape. And what I've seen happen is high failure on many farms where bees are located, whether it's close to corn or other crops that are part of the rotational program. So what I'm trying to develop is an idea that may be shared among the agriculture community, where some of the indigenous species can be placed in so that we can have a more abundance of that flora fauna, so that we can try to help these pollinators that are in turn also helping a lot of the crops, which are part of what we're discussing, and that is getting nutritional food to many families, whether they're undeserving or other families as a whole. So I'm hoping that my little voice will start to grow, as well as being a minority farmer. I'm quickly and Dumbo ear to whatever information that is out there to help minority farmers, because I have yet to see it. I hear about a lot of it, but I have yet to see it handed off. I see a lot of it handed off to many other farmers, But I do hear that as if we're working on this inclusiveness, this diversity, that maybe there needs to be a forum, maybe even a city hall that invites these diverse farmers so that they feel welcome to the community of farming in Vermont. Because as a beekeeper, I feel a great importance and contributor to the table. And if it wasn't for the beekeepers, a lot of what we are eating, as you know, would not be there. So what I am hoping is that this little voice, and the little voice meaning the honeybee voice, can be echoed a little larger so that we can see this little change. Because I think on that micro level, in the rotational crop system, I do see a lot of these indigenous species very beneficial in helping the soil, as important as either clover or alfalfa. So I just wanted to echo that, being a beekeeper and also a farmer in Vermont. So thank you, folks.
James, thank you very much. Really appreciate great comments. So I'd like to turn to Dede and James, and then I want to go to breakout. So if Dede and James could be as succinct as you can be, I want to make sure you get your question in, and then we'll go to breakout. So Dede, first you, and then James, Manny. Dede.
Okay, thanks. So one is, I have a few points and I'll also put them in the chat. How are you addressing the future clear cutting of forests as biofuel versus their role in cooling, climate cooling through transpiration, through carbon sequestration, and through cloud formation, which is increasingly seen as a role of forests? I did see the word soil sponge in there, but it was talked about more as, well, I'll just ask the question directly. Are you looking at the management of uphill fields and pastures to increase healthy soil's role in actually absorbing water uphill to prevent flooding downhill, which seems like the primary climate question in Vermont in terms of resilience? And then my third question is, are you looking at or thinking about the issue of land grabs as Vermont becomes a climate refuge, where all of our land, it just gets bought up by wealthy folks who can afford to buy it? Thanks.
Right. Easy questions, Dede. Let me turn those over to David or Alyssa, maybe for a quick response and probably longer to come. But David or Alyssa, any kind of initial thoughts to Dede's really good questions?
Alyssa, do you want to take that?
Sure, those are great questions. And one of the reasons that we're having this kind of event, I think all of those things have been mentioned or considered, and probably like fleshing them out more fully in our recommendations is something that could certainly use more work. I think your last point about the soil sponge being having a role in mitigating downstream flood impacts, I know has been considered by some of us in the subcommittee, but it hasn't been a huge piece of the conversation. It kind of overlaps with the rural resilience subcommittee. And so that might be another place that we can bring that idea to. I hope that you put your comments in the chat because yeah, the land grab one, that certainly has come up, and I think it's really challenging to think about how to address that. So if you have good ideas, we'd love to hear them. The land use policy piece is something that we're concerned about in this group, but kind of overlaps with other subcommittees that are part of the Climate Council. And so I know that those conversations hopefully will pick up in the near term. I think that's something that Vermont has struggled with for a long time is development policy and long-term land use. And then I actually don't think that we've talked that much about the role of clear cutting of forests as biofuel, but it certainly seems important to include. And I would welcome, Dede, if you have time to write maybe a longer recommendation or letter that has some specific pieces in it, we would love to read it. Thanks.
I'll just add quickly that there's another task group, the forest task group, which I also serve on, that is definitely talking about the forest harvests and biofuels and biomass for heating and those kinds of questions. So it's just being taken up in a different forum.
James, let me go to you for the final full question, and then we're going to go to breakout. So James, over to you, James Maroney.
Thank you, Patrick. I guess this meeting is a little over an hour long, and everything I have heard so far seems to be an effort to reassert the primacy of the farming modality that we have, which is conventional. I'm sure all of you know, at least I think everyone knows, that conventional agriculture was invented after the Second World War, and the purpose of conventional, or the fundamental premise of conventional agriculture, was to introduce fossil fuels or products made from fossil fuels because they were cheaper than crop rotation and mechanical weed control and a number of other things. I think it needs to be said in this meeting that buffer strips and cover crops and manure injection and no-till and nutrient management plans do not mitigate the effects of conventional agriculture. Organic agriculture was invented as an antidote to conventional agriculture. We are talking as if the reason we are here, as if the current picture of Vermont farming were so rosy that we need to maintain it rather than analyze it, as if the reason the atmosphere is now above 400 parts per million is not in large part due to the adoption of conventional farming.
Great, James, thank you. David and Alyssa, I don't know if you have any quick response to that, and then I want to send us to breakout groups.
James makes some really good points, and I think he mischaracterizes the recommendations. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how do we create opportunities for farmers to be successful economically in Vermont, as well as doing it in ways that are positive for the climate and other values. So I think the recommendations are still draft and are still being written. So thank you, James, for that input.
Right, thank you. Okay, we are going to go to breakout. So a few things. You're going to go to a breakout for about 35 to 40 minutes. We'll return at 7:45. You'll have a facilitator, a note taker, and hopefully at least one member of the subcommittee if we can distribute them efficiently. And there's some questions I'll walk you through. And then we'll come back, we'll do very brief report outs and close. There are note takers, and without attribution, we're taking notes in the breakouts. We'll save the chat for the stuff that happens in chat in the breakouts, and that'll all get assimilated back into something for both the subcommittee and then for the public at large in the coming weeks. So thank you, Maggie. I think we are ready to send people to breakouts. If you get lost, come back into the main room. Maggie will redirect you. If you get stuck in the main room, Maggie will get you there. And one breakout group will actually stay in the plenary room just to manage things. But we're going to go to breakouts now and look forward to the great conversation. So thank you.
Patrick, did you say that the notes would be taken in the chat?
No, we'll take notes separately, and you can also put stuff in the chat if you want to. So,
okay, and this chat, will the chat be saved from what's in the breakout groups? So you'll be able to see that as well? Because okay.
I can remind your facilitator to save it at the end, but yes, for sure. Thanks, Dede. All righty, everybody hang tight. Off we go.
Opening rooms now.
I think we've probably, thanks, Maggie. We've probably got almost everybody back. So what I want to do is, so each breakout group has 2 minutes. So that's not nearly enough to do justice to your great work. So 2 minutes to report out kind of like 3 or 4 high-level themes from your group. And again, we have detailed notes of attribution, the saving the chat, all of that. So, but I just want to give everybody a sense of what the group's talked about. So maybe 3 or 4 high-level points from each group. And then we're going to do a very quick ending and make sure we're timely in terms of time. So first, let me turn to Lindsey's group. And Lindsey Brand, do you want to kind of describe maybe some top level from your group?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had some great input. Something that came up a few times was that there was a feeling of wanting to be a part of these climate solutions, but then the obvious need, sorry, the train's going by, the obvious need for this to have co-benefits for farmers and for these solutions to support the viability of these farms and also not place undue burden on the farms in terms of paperwork, cost, etc. And then people also brought up excitement for flexibility that might be worked into these plans as well. as circumstances change, having the policies be flexible to adapt to changing circumstances around us, and also to be appropriate for the incredible variety of farms we have in Vermont. So how can these policies be flexible enough to be inclusive of the geographic variety for farms of different sizes as well?
Right. Thank you. And that was perfect, short and sweet, and some really high level points. Thank you so much. Jane, over to you next.
Thanks everyone for participating. One of my favorite components of that caught my attention was the comment about overall success of needing to create a pro-farmer environment in Vermont, recognizing that the most important component of all of this work will be to keep farms and farming. In order to do that, there was a real appreciative tone of recognition that farms are doing a lot, that there's been an evolution on farms. One of the farmers on our call recognized that their farm is a lot different from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, and certainly from 30 years ago. So an appreciation for all the work that's been going on, and a recognition of what else is to come, and to create the atmosphere for that to continue. There were specific comments around success needed to bring new collaborations and partnerships to bear that we haven't seen in order to make an ambitious transformation. There was a lot of discussion around soil health and regenerative practices and ideas for how to do that. And then finally, one of the big take-home points for me was the recognition of the larger macro economy that we are part of, that was missing from the strategies and actions put forward. And that is really the systemic changes that need to happen across the economy to support climate transition, that ag is on the front and center of that and really can lead and by example in that space. That really resonated with me too. Lots of other small comments and larger comments and thoughts too that will be captured in the notes, but those were some of the themes I heard that really resonated.
Great, thank you, Jane. John, I think he was going to be kind enough to report out on the group I worked with. So John, over to you.
Hi, everybody. We had 14 participants. It was a very spirited, good discussion. Points that were covered included, insurance for farmers, that for products that really work, and work for small farms in particular. There was some emphasis, interest in small farmers being focused on as a more diverse community, both in product and the participants in that community. There was talk about needing to fund things like wetland restoration and other programs for farmers to a greater degree than is presently done, to make them more amenable to farmers to do. There was discussion on staffing of organizations that interface with farmers, that many organizations, NRCS, et cetera, don't have enough people. So even though farmers wish to do certain things, there aren't the people there to help them. And there was an appeal that when we do all these things, that time and space is given to farmers to adapt to, we're not going to be able to flip a switch and say, as of tomorrow, you're all going to be XYZ, because it's not going to work that way. It's taken a while for farmers to adopt water quality practices. It will take a while for other practices. And also tailoring programs to really fit the size of the farms, and probably more emphasis on the smaller farms, making sure the programs fit properly and encourage small farmers. Thank you.
John, thank you. Marian, over to you.
Great. We had a great discussion in our breakout group. A couple of key takeaways. There was a recognition that here tonight in this group, all of us as a community are in a general consensus around the importance and the opportunities for agriculture as a solution of sort of the climate issues that we're facing. but that there's really a need, and was a bit of a recognition in the solutions that were presented today, that there's really needs to place an emphasis on education for the public and messaging to the general public about agriculture as a solution, and to then increase the accessibility of data to the public around agricultural practices and how those are shared through education with the general public around the strategies that were discussed today. And then also quite a bit of discussion around the fact that many of the recommendations discussed are focused on accessing capital, and that's a need for some of these recommendations, and that we really need to start thinking creatively about how to provide and equitably give access to folks to access that capital. There was an interesting recommendation to provide UBI, or universal basic income, for farmers who are willing to adopt soil health management practices to really try and offer incentives to boost yield, offer incentives for those soil health management practices, and to be able to sort of loosen up the opportunity for capital so that farmers can try and be part of the solution and take some creative steps towards that.
Great, thanks, Marion. I think Alyssa, over to your group.
I'm going to cover for Alyssa. Pat, this is Marley Group. Hard to summarize everything in 2 minutes here, and a lot of good stuff from our group was already said, so I'll just bring a couple other ones up. Obviously, the focus on grazing and agronomic practices, the importance of local foods, a lot of concerns about money. There's no wiggle room on farms, and making sure that that's acknowledged. One strong point is to keep things simple. Find the low-hanging fruit and make sure that that is easy to do. Limit paperwork for certain practices like cover crops that we all know are especially important, and make things a little bit more simple where we can. Try and bring back some of the programs that worked a lot in the past, or ideas that worked in the past. Anyway, one suggestion was when we used to have college students going out and helping farmers take PSNT tests, providing those kinds of services for farmers to help them get the data that they need. Remembering to look at value-added opportunities and opportunities for farms to transition to different types of livelihoods and successful agricultural enterprises, and bringing in young farmers. How can we make sure that the younger farmers find ways to be successful as well? Also, suggestions that we not disturb the soil, that we limit the amount of phosphorus fertilizer and other fertilizers that are coming into this state. Concerns with chemical impacts and the impacts on bugs and bees and pollinators. Some new terms to me: pharmacy food as medicine, which I want to learn some more about. I hadn't heard about before. Another idea of supporting local food hubs the same way we support local libraries and schools, giving them the same type of resources. And the last key point, let's not pit farmers against each other in this effort. We need to recognize the good work that farmers are doing and support each other as we all move positively forward.
Marley, thank you. Lauren, over to your group.
Going last or second to last means a lot of good things have already been said, but a couple of the key things coming out of my group was the need to be focused less so on emissions reductions and more so support for farmers for adaptation and resilience. Was a pretty much, it seemed like unanimous based on nodding opinion. A lot of conversation on the need to be making sure that strategies, actions, and actual funding are supporting workforce development in the sector, as well as youth-based education, farming, agricultural literacy at all levels, as well as farmer-to-farmer education, technical support, data monitoring, sharing. So a lot on the education outreach, education and workforce development front. And then finally, we spent the majority of our time kind of talking about the intersectionality between land access, food security, and markets, and the need to make sure that the strategies that are coming out of the Climate Action Plan are really addressing that intersectionality and supporting each of those things as individual mechanisms and support systems for this broader agriculture as a climate solution idea that it seems like a lot of conversations revolved around as well.
Great. Thank you all. That is a really rich set of ideas and a lot for the subcommittee to be thinking about. So really appreciate it. Reminder, a few things: facilitators or recorders, please just email me your notes. That was in the facilitator's instructions so we can assemble them. Maggie's recording the plenary, as you know. If you'd saved your chat, which I hope you did, if you had any in your subgroup, just send that to me too. Just send it as it is. If you save chat now, or your breakout, hopefully, when the thing ends, it'll disappear and then you can send it on to me. I want to do just a few things to wrap. I know we're close to time. Jane wants to share a few slides about just next steps, which I'm going to turn to her too. And then I'm going to ask John, our co-sponsor, and Abby, our co-chair, to really just say some closing remarks. So Jane, over to you for next steps. And Maggie, if you could project those slides, that would be great. Whoop, 1 second, Jane's has one pause. Jane, you're on mute right now.
Thanks, Pat. You would think by now I would know that. Yeah, thanks everyone. Sorry for that delay. The slides that I was going to show really represent the work of the Climate Council over the course of the next few months. And what I'd like to do rather is just roll that up in a few minutes and then point your attention to what I just put in the chat to encourage you to continue on with us in this process of engagement. So the Climate Council currently is out delivering their message through these stakeholder events. There are multiple ones happening over the course of the next 2 weeks with respect to different sectoral technical guidance here in agriculture, beyond with forests, rural communities, and we've had a number of ones with respect to in the energy space. And then starting next week, we'll have larger public engagement events statewide, 4 across the state in regional locations, as well as 3 online. I dropped in the chat the slide that takes you to the, yeah, thank you very much, Maggie. These are our 4 events coming up in Colchester, Elmore, East Dorset, Island Pond, and then online as well. We really would love to invite you all into the conversation and think about how we further advance this work and your interests in the planning process. This timeline is really relevant with respect to where we are in the process, in that we're really thinking about the how are we going to be successful in the climate action plan over the course of this first plan and then into future iterations of the planet. And so we look forward and welcome you all in. The Climate Council meets on Tuesdays every other week. We met today, so our next meeting is in 2 weeks from today. And all of those meetings, including those of the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee, are open to the public and can be found online on the website at climatechange.vermont.gov. A new website thanks to our staff for launching just earlier this week. So really, thank you all for this process and recognize that this is the first in what I hope will be many of these dialogues, and encourage you to join us over the course of the next few weeks and months as we roll through and put together the climate action plan for December 1st.
Right, Jane, thank you. So John, I want to turn over to you and then to Abby to close. And then could we put the link for regular meetings, Jane? I think regular Vermont Climate Council meetings, I think you mean Dede, just put the link in there too. That'd be great. Okay, so John.
Well, I want to thank everybody who participated today. What I heard was extremely interesting. It shows that you're all engaged. You all have opinions, which is good. And we're going to have some interesting work ahead to sort through everything. I was glad that we kind of broadened out the discussion into other areas that all have an impact on Vermont's agriculture. So that was good. So thank you all very, very much for participating, and keep paying attention, please.
Thanks, John. And Abby, over to you to bring us home for the night.
Okay, everyone. Again, everybody has said it, but I'm going to reiterate it again. It's my sincerest gratitude to everyone for taking the time this evening. I know that this is not nearly enough time to try to even get our thoughts in order as to everything that was presented. And so I do want to encourage that, I certainly am open to communications, and please feel free to reach out. I also want to assure you that, none of this is theoretical for me either. I gave the example that, we began this season running out of feed and only were able to put the cows out on pasture because it was a little bit ahead, and now we have more feed than we know what to do with, and it's all terrible quality. So this is my life as well. And immense gratitude to all of you for coming up tonight. And I really look forward to engaging with you all as we move forward and trying to think about how we can build out the capacity of all of us to remain adaptive and resilient as we move forward. So wishes for a good night and a good rest of your fall. And thank you so much. Please continue to engage.
Thank you, everybody. So appreciate it. Be well, be safe. Good night.